Welcome, Connor Beaton. Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me on the show.
I'm excited to talk to you today, Connor, and because maybe a year ago, I think it was a year ago, I came across you and I was in Vancouver and I was like, going to this ManTalks event, which I was kind of nervous about because I was thinking, crap, am I going to be the only girl that rocks up at this ManTalks event? And I was nervous, but I was like wanting to network, and everything that you kind of have written about in ManTalks really resonated with me. So I rocked up, and it happened to be on the day you were over from New York and you got up and spoke. And I remember sitting there just being so inspired by your message, why you created ManTalks, why you showed up as the man that you are today, and the way that you've been impacting and inspiring men, and I want to say women around the world. And so I really appreciate the work that you do, and I'm excited to dive in today.
Thanks so much. I appreciate that, and I'm excited to dive in too.
So we're going to talk about the shadow of men, right? And so what does a shadow mean to you?
Yeah. So it's not mine. I didn't coin it, unfortunately. I wish I did. But there was a psychologist back in the early 20th century by the name of Carl Jung, and Carl Jung is really the person that's responsible for largely not uncovering, but through his own work, labeling the different parts of the psyche. And so most people have seen the iceberg before, where they see the little tip of the iceberg sticking out, and that's the conscious mind. And then if you're standing on the edge of the iceberg looking down into the water, you can see some of the iceberg underneath the water, and that's the subconscious mind. So we can kind of see those parts of the mind. And then underneath that is this massive structure that's the unconscious mind. And within the unconscious mind is a part of the psyche that's called the shadow. And the shadow is the sort of the storage locker of our psyche, where we try and put all of the parts of ourself and our identity and our life that we dislike, that we want to avoid, that we hate, that we want to reject, that we feel embarrassed by. And so we can put trauma into that locker, into the shadow. We can put, hurt and pain from our past, divorces from our parents. All of those types of things will go into the shadow. But the important part about this is that for the majority of us, for everyone, essentially, the shadow can also house some of our potential and some of our capacities and our purpose and our sense of self-love and self-worth. So when we have these traumatic or abusive or harmful events happen in our life, let's say, you're a kid and your parents get divorced and you grow up in a household with an abusive father and your father isn't around anymore. What happens is a part of your psyche will start to say, okay, not only are men not safe, but to be a man is now not safe. It's a harmful thing. And so part of the psyche will say, well, I'm a man, and maybe I'm harmful, and so I don't want to be harmful. I don't want to hurt women, especially because I've seen my stepfather hurt my mother, and I don't want to be a man because I've witnessed a man being so harmful. And so that can create a young boy's psyche to form this part of himself that says, men are dangerous, men are hurtful, men hurt other people, men are abusive to women, whatever that narrative is. And then he'll grow up to be a man that maybe has really crappy boundaries with women because he is hesitant to set boundaries with women, because in his mind, his shadow says, hey, don't set that boundary. You're going to hurt her. And you cannot be a man that hurts a woman. So don't set a boundary. Don't say no to her. And he turns over the years into a classic nice guy. So the shadow has this broad reaching implication on our life. And it's hugely impactful, especially with men, because as men, we are taught from a very young age not to sort of break I call it the one rule of men. And the one rule of men is very similar to the rule in Fight Club, right? In Fight Club with Brad Pitt, he says that the first rule of Fight Club is you don't talk about it. And the second rule of Fight Club is only one rule. And for men, it's the exact same thing. You don't talk about what it's like to be a man. So you don't talk about what it's like to be a man going through divorce, or, a man who's struggling financially or with his mental health, if he's struggling with depression or anxiety or heightened amounts of stress. or if he's struggling sexually in his relationship. You don't talk about those things. And everything that we don't want to talk about gets put into our shadow. And so a lot of men have these huge shadows from all the things that they haven't talked about. And then they wonder why they can't lose the weight, why they're not having the type of sex that they want in their relationship. They wonder why their careers are shit and, it's not going the direction that they want. Their businesses are struggling, their finances are struggling, and they're depressed. And they wonder why. And it's like, oh, well, here's why, right? Your shadow is absolutely fucking huge. And you haven't been talking about any of these things for such a long time. Can I swear on your show, by the way? Because I just did
You
twice.
totally can.
Okay.
I already did it.
I'll drop these out there and hopefully I'll, ask for forgiveness after, right?
Yeah, I forgive you. This is interesting because how do we know that we are living life from our shadow?
Yeah, it's a good question. So generally, the indicator that you are coming from your shadow is a few things. One, avoidance, and two, reactivity. So the things that you become reactive to indicate that your shadow has started to come up, right? So let's say in a partnership, I'm just going to use heterosexual terms, a man and a woman, they're dating, let's say their husband and wife, and she asks him to do something, right? She says, hey, when you get home tonight, can you take the garbage out? It stinks. And he's like, yeah, babe, no problem. And he gets home from work, doesn't do it. She comes back, and she's like, hey, you didn't take the garbage out. And he gets reactive and he says, you don't know how hard I worked today. All these things happen. Like, screw you. You don't understand. Shadow's there, right? He's become very reactive rather than just owning the fact that he didn't do what he said he was going to do. The other side is avoidance. Now, avoidance is a really interesting part because a lot of us have desires, whether that's relationally, whether that's within our health, whether that's within our, the dreams and the purpose that we want to create in the world. And the more that we avoid those things, the more that it builds this part of the shadow. So the way that I like to think of it is that Einstein had this great quote back in the day, and he said that the rational mind is a faithful servant and the intuitive mind is a sacred gift. And we've created a culture that honors the servant and has forgotten the gift.
Yeah.
Right. And so what he was really saying is we have over-indexed on the value of our rational mind. And we have forgotten about this vast amount of wisdom that flows through us daily, which is our intuition or our gut. And the beautiful thing about why that's so important is that our rational mind is a puppet of the shadow. It is directly controlled by the shadow. It doesn't mean that our rational mind isn't helpful. It doesn't mean that our linear, logical mind isn't incredibly powerful. It just means that our shadow has direct control over our rational mind. And we can see this every time that we've fucked up in life, right? Every single time that we have screwed up in life, cheated in a relationship, lied about something that we did, said that we were going to go to the gym in the morning and then decided to wake up and eat a, double chocolate chip muffin from Costco instead. That is the shadow using the rational mind to convince you to do something that is out of your nature. It's out of integrity and it's out of character. Our intuition, on the other hand, is not a force of wisdom or processing that's going to lead us down that path. But especially as men, we have been taught to live basically from our neck up, unless we're going to have sex and then we think about one other part. But we've forgotten to connect with this gut, this intuition that we have within us. So I know it's a little bit more of a long-winded answer, and I just put a few extra things in there. But how we know that the shadow is coming up is that we are reactive, we are avoidant, and we are doing things that are often out of integrity with who we know we are capable of being in the world, in a relationship, in our health, etc.
Okay, this is like, I want to go in different directions now, but the first one I want to say on this, because this isn't like just for men either, right? Like the shadow is the same as for anyone, right?
Yeah, women definitely have a shadow. However, the masculine and the feminine have slightly different forms, simply because of the natural upbringing that men and women have. Men and women have different environments. They're treated differently culturally. And so men and women do have different shadows. How that shadow is activated is still the same, right? Women will still have reactivity, they'll still have avoidance, and so that shows up the same, but the sort of color, texture, behavior of the two shadows between the masculine and the feminine will be slightly different. And some women will have more masculine oriented shadows, and
Mhm.
some men will have more feminine oriented shadows. It just depends on their upbringing and their family structure and the environment that they were in.
Yeah. And so, like, when we talk about, when we say we're going to do something and then we don't do it, right? Like, I literally was just talking to a friend about this. She was like, I want to eat healthy. Like, I don't, like, she's like, I have so many goals about, like, I want to eat healthy and I want to train and I want to do all these things. And every night I'm snacking, and every night, and then I'm snacking so hard that I wake up the next morning and I feel like shit, and I just repeat the same cycle. Is
Mhm.
that a shadow? And then how do we identify what that shadow is and to stop the thing?
Yeah, good. To stop the thing. Yeah, how do we stop doing that? I like that hopefully you send this directly to your friend, and like how to stop the thing. So first and foremost, we need to understand how that part of our shadow was created. And the shadow is, again, it's created when we feel rejected or we reject something, when we feel embarrassed, when we avoid, when we hate a certain part of ourselves, or when we use certain things to cope with trauma and abuse or abandonment or neglect that showed up in our life. So eating, for example, can be a very integral part of the shadow, because it may have been something that as a kid you were allowed to use as a coping mechanism when things were stressful, right? So for I'll use myself as an example. As a kid, my parents went through a divorce, and there was some pretty challenging times on my end. And I definitely had an eating problem. Like, I had an eating disorder where I would just cram in popcorn and chocolate chips, and like sometimes I would make a bowl of chocolate chips and raisins, which is an odd combo, but like a whole bowl of just chocolate chips and raisins, and drink, like a 4-liter jug of milk with that. Not the whole thing, but that was just my drink of choice. But I was using that because as a kid, I was really sad. I was really frustrated about the divorce. I didn't understand it. And so whenever there was turmoil in my home and I was unhappy with with my mom or my stepdad, or, what was happening with my father, I would turn to eating food to try and deal with this weight of feeling rejected from my family system, because I didn't feel like I belonged there. And so food didn't reject me. So it started to build this part of my psyche that said, when you are hurting, then turn to food. And that information can get put into the shadow that says, don't worry about how you're feeling, just deal with it with this mechanism, right? So there's always a source problem that has caused us to act in this way. And for some of us, that behavior can kind of go on overdrive, right? We may not have even had a trigger that causes us to do it. It's just a habit that we've repeated over and over and over and over again. So the solution to this is that people need to start to get in touch with the points in their life that have caused a rip or a tear in their identity in some way, and to be able to see, okay, what were the painful moments that I started to have an unhealthy relationship with food,
Mhm.
and when did food start to become this coping mechanism? And when they can do that, they can see this darker part of their psyche. So for your friend, it may have been, I mean, who knows, right? Maybe they got made fun of at school and they felt rejected. Maybe, a boy or a girl rejected them and they, felt embarrassed. And then they went home that night and they started to eat junk food. And then slowly, gradually, every time that they felt that rejection or felt that embarrassment, they would turn to unhealthy eating. And then it just became a part of their natural cycle, right? Of at the end of every day, what I do now is I turn to this unhealthy cycle to try and numb out any of the stress, distraction, anxiety that I'm carrying around with me. And for a lot of people, that is what is happening for them, is that there's been this a few moments. It doesn't have to be one. The misconception around trauma is that it's like this one jarring,
Mm-hmm.
massive thing, like you saw someone get murdered or you were sexually abused. That's not always it, right? It can be a parent telling you that you're not good enough, or being overly critical of you consistently, that can start to form some of these habit patterns. So we need to sort of get to the root of what caused that behavior in the first place, and that requires us to be able to look into the shadow and look into these darker parts of ourself and ask, why is that there, and what sadness, anger, frustration, rejection, embarrassment did I experience that as a kid I didn't know how to deal with, right? Because like, if you're around an 8-year-old, as amazing as they are, they don't know how to cope with things, right?
Mm-hmm.
They don't have the same coping mechanisms as we do. And so they start to adapt and adopt unhealthy coping mechanisms that become a part of their shadow, right? Those coping mechanisms are a part of the shadow. It's the shadow's way of saying, here's, again, using the rational mind, here's how you should cope with the anxiety of your day. Go smash a bag of salt and vinegar Miss Vicky's chips into your face hole and you'll feel better, right? And your rational mind literally thinks that that's a good idea. Your body, on the other hand, is like, like, what are you doing? Of course I don't want that. And so that creates this beautiful and very dangerous shame cycle,
Mm-hmm.
right? Where the shadow will convince you through your rational mind that that's a good way to handle a stressful situation, and you'll do it, and then you'll feel shameful after. And it's a way of perpetuating itself, right? The shadow feeds off of its own mechanism. It feeds off of itself.
Mm, I love that. And recently I heard, I think it was like Glennon Doyle say, it's not actually the pain that hurts us most. It's the shame of the pain. And so
Mm-hmm.
I find a lot of people are so scared to sit in the pain for a moment, like to literally look at the shadow and go, oh shit, that thing that happened, or the thing that I'm feeling that doesn't feel great. It's actually the shame of admitting that they're feeling that thing to go into it. So what do you find? Like, how do you go into the pain, or how do you help men go into that pain?
Yeah, a big part of it is allowing men a space to start to reveal some of their darker parts, right? I think right now is a very interesting time because you know there are parts of men that are dangerous, right? And we all have those parts, right? Like we definitely all have those parts. But it's about creating a space where men can bring those parts forward and not be judged for them. We've sort of created a culture that says the darkness of men is unacceptable,
Mhm.
and that's sort of the ego's way of identifying that there's a problem and trying to reject it. But all that does is create more shadow. It creates more hatred, more anger. So one, we create a space for men to come and talk, to come and share their stories, to come and just be honest about the challenges that they've faced in their life, about the abuse or abandonment or struggles that they've either faced in the past or the challenges that they're facing right now, right? So the first step of therapy, again, this is Jung, the first step of the therapeutic process is confession. And unfortunately, because of the one rule of men, most guys haven't had even a space to just say, hey, I'm struggling right now, or hey, I think I might be depressed, or I'm struggling with a massive amount of anxiety, or you know what? When I was a kid, I was abused, and this is what happened to me. So we need to just start with the basic platform. And that's why I started ManTalks in the first place, was just like some guys just need to tell their story and get a little bit of it off their chest, or at the very least hear other men's stories who have gone through an immense amount of struggle, losing a child to cancer, or losing both parents at the age of 18 and then having to be an adult instantaneously, going to war in Afghanistan and seeing one of your best friends, blown up right beside you. These are things that men see, experience, don't talk about. And imagine carrying that emotional weight around with you like a backpack that has 200 pounds in it every single day, and being expected to run through life as if everything's okay. So that's the very beginning. Men need to be able to find a space where they can talk about some of these things, whether it's with with a coach, with a therapist, in a men's group, at a men's weekend. And then they need to be able to be honest about how it impacted them and how they've been actively avoiding those emotions that have come up. Sometimes it means having a bit of a dialogue with the shame that's come up, and being able to reset boundaries. And sometimes that might be an emotional release, a physical release, a mental release, a spiritual release. It can show up in many, many different ways. It really is sort of case dependent. There's not like a one size fits all, but the beginning of it is starting to normalize the conversation that it's okay for men to start to open up and talk about some of the challenges that they've faced in their life, because without that, the rest of the steps won't happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And then have you experienced like a man then doing this, like being vulnerable enough to do this, and maybe with his partner that is a woman, and then it kind of smacking me in the face a bit? You know what I mean? Like, it's like they open up and then they're like, don't do that because that's not okay.
Yeah, like it's not okay. They get that message from themselves or from their partner. Which one do you mean?
I
Or from
mean,
both?
I think I'm speaking from a woman's perspective on, yeah, we could say that we want a man to be vulnerable and open up, but are we actually supporting them in that process? And what does that look like? Like, what does a man need to feel supported in that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. So, I think the reality is that a lot of women aren't ready for men's vulnerabilities, because it's usually foreign for her. A lot of women have grown up in an environment where they've seen closed down fathers that weren't open emotionally, weren't communicative emotionally, didn't talk about their challenges, or they saw men on the other side of the spectrum where they saw very emotionally volatile fathers, who were, their anger was just explosive, or they saw emotionally volatile fathers in the sense that they were very weak and meek and quiet and mild. And so, they grew up sort of not trusting his emotions. So, women have their own sort of inherent work to do to be able to prep themselves for a man's vulnerability, because it can be a lot and it can seem foreign.
Mm-hmm.
Um, on the man's side, again, he's sort of culturally told not to open up and be vulnerable, but it takes an immense amount of courage. I think that where most of those things start is that a lot of guys have um, wounds or hurt or pain that have been handed down to them from other men. And so a huge part of men's work, I guess you could say, is resolving and healing some of the pain that they've been given from the other men in their life, whether that's guys that they went to high school with or played sports with, guys that they grew up with. Maybe that's, fathers or uncles. I've like, I mean, maybe I should like give you an example of it. Um, like some of the men that I've worked with have been from the military, and some of the things that they have expressed have been, incredibly challenging and confronting. Like, one of the men grew up in a household where he grew up in a militaristic environment. So his father was in the military. The expectation was that he would go in the military. And as a 6-year-old boy, him and his siblings had to line up outside of their bedroom when their father would come home from duty. So he would be out of town for a week or two, and the father would come home, line them up outside of the room, and the father would go inspect the room. And then if anything was off, if anything wasn't to spec, they would get whipped with a cord or a belt, or, spanked, or whatever that looked like. So imagine, as a child, you are growing up with a man who is so controlling and abusive that what you learn about routines and discipline is that they are deeply punishing and that they are painful. And then, these men either grow up to follow suit with that, and they follow suit with needing to be militaristic and controlling of their external environment. And when things don't go their way, they need to punish other people or themselves for having gotten them wrong. Or they go on the other side and they can't seem to get anything together, because order and structure seems like the most painful thing for them. And so they avoid it altogether and they are a little bit lost. But both of these are examples of how the masculine shadow can show up, because it's a disorder with order, and it's a disorder with structure, and it's a disorder with commitment and agreements. And so those are huge parts of the wounding that a lot of men have been given from other men in their childhood. Maybe maybe a guy grew up with a great father, but a father who was never emotionally available and actually didn't teach him how to express anger or love or compassion, and was just sort of this like numbed out neutral guy trying to make it through life running his own business. So there's many, many different examples of the type of work that men need to do, but all of it comes back to, it needs to usually start with them doing the work of healing their relationship to the masculine, to the primal part of themselves that seems dangerous, because if that's out of control, or if they are disassociated from it, it's going to create a whole bunch of chaos in
Yeah.
their relationships and in their life.
Yeah. And what is the benefit of somebody doing the actual work to heal this stuff?
Yeah. Good question. I think, again, like I said before, the beauty of the shadow is that for many guys, their capacities and their potential actually live in their shadow. And their sort of truest version, I don't even like saying that, like their best self, but their truest version, I feel like it's such a cliche thing to say, right? It's so positive, like personal development buzzword, right? Your
Yeah.
best self.
Yeah.
But like that, your best version truly is caged up inside of the shadow. And so the benefits of it are pretty simple. It's like you get to stop hiding things. You get to start to integrate more authentic versions of yourself, more authentic wants and desires. You start to have a deeper sense of self-worth, right? So like, here's this, the simplest way that I can put this. I got asked this question on a panel the other day, and someone said, what's self-love? And I said, self-love is the ability to face your darkness and love that.
Mm.
And that's a big part of what shadow work is like, you look at all the shit that you've been through and the stuff that you just fucking hate about yourself. And you're like, okay, if I can learn to integrate this, I know for certain that I will be a more whole and complete person. So that's a very loving way of saying it. I think the more direct way of saying it is like, if you want to have better sex, face your fucking shadow.
Mm.
Like, if you want to have a better relationship and communication, face your shadow. You want to make more money, face your shadow. You want to build a better business, face your shadow. None of those things are possible in a healthy, balanced way without facing your shadow. You might be able to do it in an unintegrated way, but you might be one of those people that finds themselves having built the $20 million company, selling it and feeling absolutely empty and meaningless because you didn't have the right uh, values going into it. And so you sold parts of yourself along the way. You acted out of integrity in order to build that company. And now you feel an immense amount of shame on the other side, having built it. Or you, or you never really knew who you were in the first place. And so the company was just a front in order to help you feel a certain way about yourself. And you derived value from that company, or you derived value from the relationship. And there's always a certain amount of emptiness that comes along with that. So I guess the simplest way of saying it is that your deepest sense of self-worth comes out of it.
Mm. That's so powerful because, I feel like even like that example, right? There's a lot of different things that we're doing in life to feel a certain way. And then being so scared of that being stripped away from us, or that relationship ending, or like, that job security leaving, because we're putting so much of our worth or valuing that on the external thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's like not uncommon that people are still so scared of going within.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like
Yeah.
this weird, like, it's like, what, like, how do we make it okay?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I think a big part of it is understanding that everyone has their own journey, and some people just need to go on the path of trying to find the answers outside of themselves to realize that they're not there.
Mm.
and that they buy the one-way tickets to Thailand, and 6 months later are pointed directly back at themselves
Mm-hmm.
in one way or another. And so some people are going to be able to hear that this is the type of work that needs to be done, and other people are going to think that they need to go on these wild adventures to sort of find themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And that might work for some people, it generally might, but only if they are forced to face their shadow, right? This is a, like, have you ever heard of the hero's journey?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you can think about this part, the shadow, as the part where you have to face the dragon, where you have to face the demons. And they're sort of like that call to adventure. The hero's called to adventure. They go out on the adventure. They sort of like meet the dragon or the demon. And in this case, internally, our dragon or demon is the shadow. And so, in order to self-actualize, in order to become the hero or the best version of ourselves, we have to face this part of ourselves. And unfortunately, some people wait until they hit rock bottom in order to do so. That was my path. I waited until I bottomed out in order to face this part. But for other people, they can enter into this work much sooner than that and start to face this part actively. Would it be helpful if I gave you sort of like a breakdown of some of the different parts of like the shadow masculine?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. So there's many, many different parts. I think I'm just going to rattle off a few. So things like control, dominion, very transactional behavior, right? So it removes emotion, like unintegrated cerebral processing. So that's like, again, like I said before, over indexing on the rational mind and ignoring the emotional or intuitive brain.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it can be very neglectful. It's incredibly linear. It's very self-centered. That's why when a man is in his shadow, a woman will often say that he's narcissistic.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's kind of predatory, and it really kind of like feeds off of other people, and it acts in shady ways that really don't feel good. There's a lot of denial. Um, it's very disharmonious, and so there's a lot of incongruency that shows up. It's a lot of impatience, and so usually that's a good sign if a man is incredibly impatient in his life, that there's a lot of shadow there just lurking behind the scenes. Um, and I think the big one is probably a scarcity mindset. Like when you experience a man, or if you are a man who has a very scarcity based mindset, that can show up through depressive thoughts. It can show up through very heightened anxious thoughts. But that scarcity mindset is a really big part of the masculine shadow, and it's there because it's like, oh, there's not enough, there's not enough, there's not enough.
And you're talking about the masculine shadow in men, right? Like this would be different if it was the masculine shadow in women.
No, that'd be quite similar if it
Okay.
was a masculine shadow within women. The feminine shadow is a little bit different. The feminine shadow is more of like the insecurity, the wavering, the like very obsessive nature, the like compulsive nurturing and caretaking, lots of rumination. And so you'll find some men that they have lots of rumination, and they generally exude more feminine qualities,
Mm-hmm.
because that rumination is sort of keeping them stuck in their life in some way, shape, or form. And because of that, they can't take action, and they actually feel emasculated because of that. Because for a man, taking action in his life is a very, very important part. Um, the feminine shadow can also be very volatile and sort of erratic. It can give a lot of scrutiny and be very critical of the outside world, or very critical of the person that it's within. Lots of shamefulness and neediness, and yeah, those are the main ones that I can think of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow. Do you find that like even like when we're starting to want to look in the shadows, that meditation is a powerful way to start to do that? Or do you recommend being with somebody else?
Yeah, I mean, meditation can be can play a huge role in it. I think for what I've noticed is that a lot of men that haven't stepped into this work before. A good sign for a man that he's got a pretty active shadow is the phrase, "I can't meditate." That's usually like, it's like, okay, your shit's cluttered up there, right? So that's one of the most active things. Like guys are like, oh, I can't meditate. Usually it's because their mind is just unruly, right? There's tons of thoughts. It's going a mile a minute. They can't control it. They feel out of control. And for some of them, when they sit to meditate, it will actually jack up their anxiety. It'll actually fuel their anxiety in an even bigger way, because the shadow has become uh, so penetrative, like latched on to the rational mind's processing, that as soon as you start to quiet your mind, it feels threatened. And
Mm,
so it won't want to be seen. And so, yeah, meditation's a big part of it. Silence is a big part of it. Being able to put yourself in uncomfortable positions, healthy, uncomfortable positions is a big part of it. Risking rejection is a huge part of it, especially for intimacy and connection. That is integral to being able to face your shadow, because it's uncomfortable and it requires vulnerability. Um, all of those things will do it. Again, being around men who are going to call you forward is another huge part of it. And there's a difference between calling out and calling forward. When we call someone out, it's from a place of our ego. We're like, oh, I called that person out. I showed them. I taught them. It's like, yeah, that was more about you than it was about them.
mhm,
Calling someone forward is about being able to see their capabilities, their capacity as a human being, and saying, I know intuitively that that you're better than that in some way. Not that you need to say those exact words, but that you give them feedback in a way that calls them forward into the person, man, woman, husband, wife, father, whatever, that person has said that they want to be. And you hold them accountable to their better version. I think that's the simplest way that I can say, calling someone forward. You hold them accountable to the person that they said that they are capable of being. And
mhm,
that's uncomfortable. But as a man, we grow through challenge. Men fundamentally need to be challenged. When they are not challenged, they will move into a stagnant place. And that stagnation will start to erode their sense of self-worth. And so, for the masculine shadow, stagnation is also a huge part of that. So a man needs to be able to start to take action towards doing things that are expansive for him. And that expansion helps him feel a deep sense of purpose. That can be, starting to take care of his health a little bit better, starting to eat a little bit healthier, maybe getting up a little bit earlier so he can journal or go to the gym, starting to connect in a more intimate way with his partner, be open about what he wants sexually. All of those things require expansion, right? It's one of the reasons why porn is a $57 billion industry,
mhm,
right? Because there are so many men out there that are fucking terrified to communicate what it is that they want sexually from their partners. They're terrified.
mm,
They don't know how to express it. They don't know how to ask for it. They don't know how to say, I want to be able to explore this power dynamic or that fantasy. They don't know how to say it.
mm.
And uh and on the other side, largely women's
Yeah.
sexuality has been largely repressed. And so it's this perfect shitstorm that the shadows created sexually that has turned itself into a massive business, all so that people don't have to actually communicate in their relationship, like, this is how I want to have sex,
Mhm.
and this is what I want to explore. So we need to move into expansion as men, in order to start to face our shadow, because we cannot expand without facing that darker part. We can't expand without facing the parts of ourselves that are holding us back.
Right. Do men want to get called forward from women?
Hmm. That's such a good question. I can tell that you've been talking about men and women for a while. um, yeah, yes and no. Yes and no. Um, so yes, they do, from women that they really trust. Um, they do want to get called forward, and maybe what I should also preface that with is that men who are doing the work want to get called forward. Men who are controlled by their shadow won't want to hear what a woman has to say, because his shadow will take it as a personal attack. And, the challenge is that uh, trust for men and women is often built a little bit differently. Can I speak about that real quick?
Yeah, that's valuable.
So trust for men is built off of respect and honor. So if a man feels respected and he respects you, there's trust there. If there's a good sense of honor, which can be replaced with the word integrity, then there's a really solid foundation of trust. Trust for women, between a woman and a man specifically, it's a little bit different, I think, between women and women, but I could be wrong because I'm not a woman. But trust between women and men is built on the foundation of ownership. And so a woman needs to see a man who can take ownership and accountability over his own life, over his own desires, wants, sexual cravings, purpose, desires in his work. She needs to see him take ownership over those things. And that's what builds the foundation of trust for her. And it's why it's so important for men to start to condition themselves to be able to hear what a woman has to say, especially if he trusts that woman. And you can kind of see in relationships that they start to break down. Again, we're talking about heterosexual ones, but this is applicable to all relationships. You can see that they start to break down when a man in some way, shape, or form doesn't respect the opinion of the woman that he's with.
Mm.
And it inevitably fails every single time, or they stay together for reasons that are beyond me and they're both just fucking miserable. I think that there's probably people listening to this that are like, oh, that's my parents. Like my dad does not respect what my mom has to say, but they're still together for some unbeknownst reason and they seem to hate each other, but neither of them will leave.
Yeah.
So we need that. We need that respect to be there,
Mm.
and that's what sort of builds that foundation. So yes, a man should absolutely be open to hearing what a woman has to say, especially his partner, because she'll be able to be a mirror for things that he can't see sometimes, because she'll be bringing the feminine forward. She'll be bringing in a different perspective, which carries just as much weight as the masculine. And it's so important that we are able to view that side of life, because without that, we're blinding ourselves. We're literally trying to see the world through one eye, but we have two working lenses.
Mm.
And so it's an incredibly important part. And the no of it is that what I said before, they won't want to hear it when there's shadows in the way. So they won't want to hear it when they're rejecting, when they are reactive, when they are avoiding a truth that would expand them. Um, that's when they won't want to hear it. Or if they are hearing it from a woman that they don't respect, that they think doesn't have integrity or honor, or from a woman that they don't trust for some reason, but usually it comes back to that integrity and respect.
That's really powerful. What about if you're hearing the message, like you like, yeah, like, yep, I know that I need to change this situation or do something different, but I don't know how, or I don't know. I feel like it's kind of like this block to wanting to actually do the work. So it's like, yeah, I know I need to do that thing, but I don't know how. So I'm just not going to do it. So I'm just going to stay in the shit relationship. I'm just going to do the, you know what I mean? It's like,
Yeah.
what can they do if that's showing up for people?
Yeah, great. So I don't know how is part of the shadow.
Mm-hmm.
It's part of the illusion that you either, maybe you really don't know how, in which case you need to figure it out. But I don't know how is a form of avoidance. It's a form of saying I don't want to figure this out. Like every time the people that are listening to this, every time you say I don't know how, I want you to replace it with I don't want to, and see how that feels, and notice the subtle difference. Because when we say that I don't know how, it's our rational mind saying I don't cognitively rationally know how to figure this out. And instead of listening to my intuition that does know how, that's probably been telling me how and telling me exactly what I need to do, rather than listening to that, I'm going to keep mentally masturbating about this and never reaching a climax. And so I know it's sort of
Beautiful
like
analogy.
yeah. I know that's sort of like a rough way of saying it. But I used to I did a short stint working with Apple,
Mm-hmm.
and someone there much wiser than me in leadership and business said people either know exactly what needs to be done and aren't willing to do it, or they genuinely don't know how, in which case you have to teach them.
Mhm.
So those are pretty much the only two scenarios. The majority of the time, when people say that they don't know how, it's usually that there is a resistance towards doing what they intuitively know needs to be done. And they need to seek out people to reinforce that, whether that's a coach, whether that's a therapist or a mentor or a group or whatever that is. And if they genuinely don't know how, and internally they're like, no, I just actually, no one's taught me how to do this. Like, no one's taught me how to set the boundary. No one's taught me how to say no to that person. No one's taught me how to say yes to myself and what I want. Cool, that's okay. Find someone that has, right? Find someone that you have listened to, learned from, heard from, and respect, who that when you hear them, you're like, your intuition kicks in and says, that person knows how to say no. That person knows how to say yes. That person knows how to do the thing. And so I'm going to do whatever it takes to go and learn from them.
Mhm.
I have found for myself that apprenticeship and mentorship are the most masterful tools in existence. We overvalue intaking information by simply trying to memorize it, rather than integrating into our body knowledge based off of learning it from someone else who's showing us how to do it, and then being sort of gently but forcefully guided out into the world to actually execute on it. We need to be able to embody these things. So that's a little bit of a long-winded answer, but I hope that that lands for some of the listeners.
Yeah, that's so good. And I know that we're kind of out of time. It's like, okay, part 2 of the podcast.
Yeah.
But I wanted to ask like one last question before, actually, no, where can people go to find out about the work you're doing first? And then I'll ask the last question. Like, yeah, where can people go?
Yeah, they can, just follow me on Instagram. I don't have a huge following, but I think there's like, well, I don't have a huge following compared to my wife, but I've got like 45,000 people that come to me daily and like, read and listen and watch. So Instagram at ManTalks is probably the best way to go. You can go to the website at ManTalks. You could go to ConnorBeaton.com. All of those platforms are going to be great. We've got a private Facebook group for men that's just called the ManTalks community. And there's about 5,000 guys in there that just share these very open, real types of conversation and do step one, which is starting to open up about the stuff that's going on in their life. So that's where they can find me.
Mm-hmm. You have an amazing community and you're impacting in a massive way. So you
Thank you.
need to know that. And my last question I have for you is, if you weren't hitting rock bottom, so like circling back to your own experience, if now knowing what you now know, if you didn't need to hit rock bottom, what would you do instead?
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, I just finished up one of the chapters in the book that I'll hopefully be releasing later this year, called "Understanding the Shadow of Men," and it's going to be all about you know helping men be guided through this process.
I love that.
And one of the interesting things in the opening, as I was writing through my story, I was kind of like thinking about this question of like, where would my life have gone if I didn't hit rock bottom? And I think it would have just kept getting worse.
Mm.
It just would have kept getting worse. But I think what you're actually asking is what's the work that you would have done in order to have not hit rock bottom. And so I think the challenge is, and I'm gonna answer this question by um, asking and answering a question that I have a lot of women ask me. That I have tons of women reach out to me constantly, and they're like, "How do I know if I should leave my partner?" And I always respond, because they'll say all these things are happening. He won't go do the work. He seems to be getting worse. He's depressed. There's lots of anxiety, da 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 da. And they sort of give me like the list of symptoms, like I'm like the man doctor, or like the man whisperer. I'm somehow gonna like whisper something.
Yeah,
In
like
his
in
ear.
like slide into his DMs and let him
Yeah,
know.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Right. I'm gonna like send him like some telepathic message.
Yeah.
But I always answer with the same question. Ask the man in your life if he thinks he needs to bottom out before things change.
Mm.
Ask him if he fundamentally believes that he needs to hit rock bottom before improvement starts to happen. And for some men, the answer is going to be yes. And for those men, get out of their way, because they're just going to go down. They're going to go down. They're going to go down hard, because they have been internally conditioned in some way in their life. They believe that they need to be completely stripped down of who they are before they can start to build themselves back up. And that was my case. There was a part of me that believed that what I deserved was to hit rock bottom, that I didn't deserve to actually start to grow and expand and heal through the stuff that I was dealing with. For men that say, no, I genuinely want to get better, then the process is a little bit different. So what I would have done, knowing what I know now, is I would have gone much sooner to the man that I apprenticed with, who had worked with Carl Jung and some of his pupils, and who had been taught this lineage of Jungian psychology and all about the shadow. And I would have gone much sooner and said, here are all of my lies. Here's my infidelity. Here's my pain. Here's just the shitty dysfunction that I can't figure out why the hell I'm doing that. Like, why am I watching all this porn? Why am I cheating on this woman that I love? Why am I so dysfunctional with money? And why am I drinking so much? Like I had a lot of problems, but I would have gone to him earlier. I would have sought out help earlier. But because I held on to the one rule of men, that you don't talk about it, I thought that I was more broken, more faulty, if I went and told someone and sought out help. And so what I would have done is I would have sought that help out sooner. And, I think the reason why I do this work is that I've seen too many men in my life personally, who haven't sought out that help early on in life, and who lost their lives because of it, who now aren't alive because they took their own life, or they drank themselves to death, or overdosed on something because they were running from this part of themselves and they wouldn't reach out for help. So I would have reached out for help before that, because there's so much fucking strength in it, and you can't see it. The sad part is you can't see it until the other side. You can't see how much strength there is in having someone teach you how to pick yourself back up off the mat, and on occasion pick you back up. And one of the things that really changed for me, my mentor said to me, because I was working with him, and he just believed in me. Like I was working and I was paying him whatever I could, and I was apprenticing with him, and there was times where I couldn't pay him what he deserved, in my opinion. And he would have me chop wood and plant in his garden and stuff like that, because he was quite a bit older. He's since passed away. But I asked him, like, why are you doing this? Why are you helping me? And I'll never forget his words. He said, sometimes we all need someone to believe in us just a little bit more than we do right now. And I believe in you more than you do right now. And I want you to know that. And man, like it almost brings me to tears just saying it. Like I just it's like right there.
Yeah.
And if I can just give that to other men for the rest of my life, that is such an incredible gift. To have someone else believe in you more than you believe in yourself is one of the most empowering things. So I would say, reach out, find someone to work with, to learn from, go to the workshop. Don't just try and find all the answers in a book or an online program. Like, actually go and do the work, get uncomfortable, risk rejection, risk failure, risk getting it wrong, and see what you're capable of.
I have like chills happening.
Yeah.
Oh, I was like right there with you too. I was like, I want to cry
We should
about
just
this.
put that at the beginning.
Yeah, now I feel like we're going into something. Okay, no. Oh, that was an amazing chat, Connor. Thank you so much for sharing and offering this. It's been so valuable for people, and I really just deeply appreciate where you have been, where you've come from, and where you're going.
Thank you. Thanks so much. And if I can shamelessly, what I will say is that the book's going to come out later this year. So if you're interested, please follow along in the journey. I'll be sharing lots of like little nuggets of wisdom on Instagram as we go along, and sharing some of the chapters on there for you to just read for free. So yeah. So thanks for having me on here.
Thanks so much.